Okay, so second week, second disciple. All right. So first thing we're gonna do, we're gonna name them. So who would like to name a disciple for me? Somebody other than Vivian. Huh?
Paul.
No, Paul was not one of the
Saul.
12 disciples. No, he comes later. Anybody want to name one?
Andrew.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Yes, we have Andrew.
Is there Michael too?
No.
Isaiah?
Who?
Isaiah?
No.
Oh.
I don't think you were here for the pre-test, though. We did a pre-test and we made people name them. Most of us could not name more than 3 or 4 disciples, so we're learning all 12. So who did we learn about last week? Peter, Simon Peter, yes.
Luke?
No, Luke was not one of the 12 disciples. He was a doctor and a follower of Paul. That's why he wrote the Gospel of Luke.
Maybe it was just a priest.
I mean, the people you are mentioning, Isaiah, Luke, great men, not part of the original 12 disciples. So, all right, Vivian, you're the bookworm here. Let's hear the rest of them.
There's Judas, both Judases.
So we have Judas Iscariot, yes, and then we have the other Judas, also known as Thaddeus and Labius. Go ahead.
2 of the James.
We have 2 Jameses, right? Can you differentiate them?
One has a brother.
All right. One is one of the sons of Zebedee has a brother who is John. So you got that one, and then we have the other James, son of Alphaeus. All right. So good job. Any more?
There's Philip.
We have Philip. Yes.
Matthew.
Matthew. Yes. Also known as Levi. Did Philip have a brother?
I don't know yet.
Why so many different names?
Okay, that's part of the teachings. So we'll talk about that here in a second. He had a Philip, Bartholomew, also known as Nathaniel. And then you're only missing 2.
Wait.
You always mess this one up because it's a
Oh no. Thomas.
Thomas the twin. Yes, good job. And then the last one. Anybody else other than Vivian?
You can have it.
Simon the Zealot. All right, so we have another Simon because it's a very popular name, and he's a zealot because that's a group of Hebrews that are opposing the Roman rule in the area. Yes, so go back to our first lesson 2 weeks ago. We talked about why we're studying the 12 disciples, right? And yes, it's very confusing, right? We have 2 Simons, 2 James, 2 Judases, 3 have 2 names, and 1 has 3 names. Well, it's actually pretty simple, and in a Korean church, we can relate to it quite a bit, actually. So the first thing is, right, there's sometimes people have like a nickname or a family name, right? And so it gets a little confusing. And then there's also names that are just very, very common. Like Joshua is a very common name pretty much in America, all over the place, right? Then the other thing is they had Hebrew names and Roman names, right? Just like in this church, a lot of people have a Korean name and an American name, right? Vivian is Vivian with her American name, but she's Sunju, right? With her Korean name, right? So she has 2 names, even though I think your full name is Sunju Vivian Kim, right?
Son Vivian Ju Kim.
Yeah.
Split in half.
Yeah, so your dad was explaining it to me one day. I'm still confused. But anyways, so reason why some of them have different names is they might have a Hebrew name, right? And then they also have their Roman name. The other thing is Simon Peter was given the name Peter by Jesus, right? And so we learned about that last week when we were learning about Simon Peter. So does that answer your question, Jane?
Yeah.
Okay. But yes, so it's very confusing because so many of them have multiple names. Some of them share the same name. So we have to differentiate. Was it Simon Peter or was it Simon the Zealot, right? Was it James, the son of Zebedee or brother of John? Or was it the other James, the son of somebody else, Alphaeus, right? So yeah, it gets very confusing. That's why we're breaking this down one disciple at a time. Andrew is kind of a more in the background character, but there's still quite a bit to say about him. And we're going to talk all about Andrew today. There's going to be a few days where we're going to probably talk about more than one disciple at a time. I don't want to do more than two because I don't want anybody to get confused. But some of these guys, there's not a whole lot to say about them because they're not really mentioned a whole lot in the New Testament. So here we are. We have Andrew. All right, and here's a little picture I got of Andrew off the internet. Apparently, he was one of the first called, and that's something that is attributed to him. And we're going to talk about that here in the next upcoming slides. But today we're going to talk about Andrew, his occupation, his family, how he found Christ or how Christ found him, and life after the resurrection, right? So this is kind of the theme that we're going to go through on every disciple as much as we can, right? Okay, so occupation. This is pretty much the same slide from last week, right, with Simon Peter, because they were brothers. And what did they do? They were fishermen, right? We see this in how Matthew describes how Andrew and Simon Peter meet Jesus, right? They were fishing. So we obviously know they were fishermen. And they had a small fishing business. Oh man, I didn't change Andrew to Peter on that slide. Anyways, so it was Peter, James, and John, along with Andrew, who had a fishing business, right? And so the main fish in that area on the Sea of Galilee, which is basically a big lake, was mango tilapia. So when you eat tilapia next time, you can think of Simon Peter and Andrew. There's also some other fish in that sea. There's really small fish, and then there's really big, like carp-like fish. But this is the most common fish to try to be fished for food. Okay, so they were brothers, so obviously they lived in the same area, and they had a business together, so they obviously lived in the same area. So it's the same slide from last week, but what did I say? It's all about repetition, right? So they lived in Capernaum and Bethsaida, right? So over here we have the Sea of Galilee, and if you can't see because you sit in the back, you should sit more up front if you want to see better. We have Capernaum up here on the northwest corner, and then the very northern tip of the Sea of Galilee, we have Bethsaida. So this is where the two brothers lived, right? And the Jordan River is one that flows out of the Sea of Galilee. For context, the Sea of Galilee is about 8 miles wide and 13 miles long. So it's really just a really big lake, right? Okay, and this is kind of giving you a bigger overall picture of Jerusalem, right? So up here we have the Sea of Galilee, right? And then here we have the Jordan River, and we know that John the Baptist was going up and down the Jordan River, right, preaching and baptizing people within the Jordan River. However, the kind of central hub for Jews at the time is Jerusalem. So Jerusalem is kind of all the way down here in the south, and much of Jesus' ministry starts off in this Galilean area over here, right? And so there was obviously a reason for that. He wanted men who weren't being corrupted by the establishment of the Pharisees, right? So he just wanted kind of a fresh take on God. So we get a lot of our disciples from this area, and that's where the beginning of Jesus' ministry on earth begins. Okay, so family, once again, we have, he's a brother to Simon Peter, right? It's very important because there's, two sets of brothers at least in the disciples, right? We have Simon Peter being a brother to Andrew, and we have James and John who are brothers. So obviously, Jesus was fine with having a family affair as his 12 disciples, right? And he is also called the son of Jonah, not the famous one with the whale. Jonah, just another name for John. Okay, so pretty important. How does Andrew meet Jesus? So very similar to Peter, we hear about the initial meeting in two different ways. The book of Matthew describes it as a fishing experience. The book of John describes it differently. So the book of John is probably a little more accurate for the initial meeting of Jesus. So here it is again. From the book of John, chapter 1. The next day, John was there again with two of his disciples. When he saw Jesus passing by, he said, "Look, the Lamb of God." The two disciples being Andrew and John the disciple, right? I know it's confusing because we have John the Baptist and John the disciple, right? So John the disciple was following John the Baptist. When the two disciples heard him say this, they followed Jesus. Turning around, Jesus saw them and asked, "What do you want?" And they said, "Rabbi," which means teacher, "where are you staying?" "Come," he replied, "and you will see." So they went and saw where he was staying and spent that day with him. It was about 4 p.m. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of the two who heard what John had said and who had followed Jesus. The first thing Andrew did was to find his brother Simon and tell him, "We have found the Messiah," that is the Christ. And he brought him to Jesus. And Jesus looked at him and said, "You are Simon, son of John. You will be called Cephas," which is translated as Peter. So I know it's kind of a repeat from last week, but what's important is Andrew leaves John the Baptist because John the Baptist is basically just leading the way for Jesus to come, right? And John says, "Don't follow me. You need to follow him," right? He is the one that you need to follow. He is the Lamb of God. So Andrew leaves John, right? He was doing like a part-time discipleship with John the Baptist, probably whenever John was up in that area. And he goes to follow Jesus and kind of stays like the afternoon or the night around Jesus. But what's important is he doesn't just keep Jesus to himself. Like I said in my sermon yesterday, you need to bring people to Jesus, and Andrew's well known for that. And the first thing he does is he goes to his brother and tells him about Jesus. He says, "We have found the Messiah," right? He doesn't just hold it to himself. He immediately goes and finds his brother and brings his brother to him. Now, of course, Peter is also there for the fishing experience, right? Where Jesus gets onto the boat to preach to people on shore. And then he tells Peter, "Go out and fish." And Peter's like, no, we've done that already. It's not working. And then he finally gives in and he throws the net over. And the fish are so plentiful, it almost drowns the boat, right? Andrew's there for that. He's kind of just more in the background again, right? It mentions him being there, but he's not like the forerunner character. So where else do we hear about Andrew in the Bible? So he's kind of mentioned often, but almost hardly by himself. And you'll see a lot of the disciples, many of them are just mentioned by name because they were part of the 12, right? But Andrew gives us a really unique perspective. So he's often seen bringing people to Christ, right? And you see this with the boy with the fish, with the feeding of the 5,000, right? They're all trying to figure out how they're going to feed everyone. And you have Andrew, he says, "Jesus, I have a boy here with some fish," right? And so obviously that boy is a very important part of the story because they didn't even have any fish to begin with, right? And then he brings Peter to Christ, right? So he brings Peter and introduces Peter to Jesus. And then we have Philip. Philip found some men, they were Gentiles, and he didn't know what the protocol was for bringing Gentiles to Jesus to introduce them. So what he does is he goes to Andrew, because Andrew is always bringing people and introducing people to Jesus, right? And so he brings them to Andrew, and Andrew says, oh yeah, let's go introduce them to Jesus, right? And so we often see Andrew as that guy, and he's introducing people to Jesus. Maybe we all should be a little bit more like Andrew in introducing people to Jesus. So we see him at the feeding of the 5,000. He's not at the transfiguration. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the transfiguration. It's kind of briefly glanced over in the Gospels. It's a really small part, but it's very important. And after we get through James and John, we're going to take a break and talk about the transfiguration. But even though Andrew was part of the big four, the disciples, right, the first four, he wasn't there. He's not really seen as a leading figure anywhere in the Bible, and he's not really ever seen in Scripture preaching, right? As opposed to his brother Peter. His brother Peter is mentioned often, like very, very often. He might say the wrong things half the time, right? He might be all or nothing sometimes, but his brother is mentioned quite often. But Andrew takes a little bit more of a back seat. Books by Andrew. Well, it's blank because he didn't contribute any part of the Bible, but that's okay, right? He might have wrote letters to churches, but maybe they weren't included in the Bible. It wasn't God's will to have anything that he wrote in there, but we know that he didn't contribute to any of the actual writings of the Bible. Andrew in the background, right? So Peter had the spotlight, and we talked about that. But Andrew was fine working in the background. And there's a lot to be said about that, right? Like your mom today, right? When she was trying to be up front, she was missed in the back, right? Like the slides weren't going forward at the right time, right? I think there was some sound issues, right? And your mom is often in the background, right? She's not always up front like your dad is, right? But she's very well needed in her place in the back, running the AV equipment, running the slides, the many other things that she does when it's not Sunday, right? But she has a very, very important part of God's ministry. She's just not always the front man. And so if we think about like a band or a play, right? Everybody wants to be the lead singer or the lead guitarist, right? But who wants to be the AV guy or the lights guy, right? Or the person pulling the curtain open and shut, right? And maybe there is somebody that wants to do that, but we can't have a band and we can't have a play without those smaller pieces, right? In an orchestra, right, you have lots of different instruments, and some of them are like way cooler than others, right? A lot of people want to play the saxophone because it's cool and jazzy and you can do a whole bunch of stuff with it. But you always have that one guy who has to just go with the cymbals, right? And what is some of the songs without cymbals? I mean, it's still a song, right? But it's not as good, it's not as dramatic, but you have to have those people. And so Andrew lets us know that we can still do a lot of good things for Jesus, but we're doing it in the background, right? And one of the most important things that Andrew does is he brings people to Jesus. So we just need to remember that we can always constantly be introducing people to Jesus, right? So planting seeds is just as important as the harvest, right? Andrew's always going around and he's planting seeds in people, right? And then maybe other people are harvesting those seeds, right? But he's planting the seed of Jesus into people. Okay, so after the Christ's resurrection and ascension, So he continues on to be a disciple of Christ. He's only really mentioned in Acts as being the 12 that went to go carry on Jesus's ministry. He delivers the message of Jesus far and wide across Europe and parts of Asia. And he's also known as the patron saint of Russia and Scotland. So, once again, you guys might want to move up next week so you can see better, right? But so this is some of the mapping of Andrew's ministry, right? So we're kind of all over the place. Just to give you some context, here's Italy, here's Greece, we have Turkey, Syria, right? This is Iraq, so he's kind of skirting that area here. Here's the country of Georgia, right? And then we're kind of going up here into Eastern Europe. So we have like Belarus, and then I forget what the name of this was. Scythia? I'm probably saying that incorrectly. But he went really far north, right? So Andrew definitely covered some territory, right? And other than him spreading Jesus's message, like in a historical context, he's not really well known for much. Okay, so crucifixion. We talked about this before. Pretty much all of the disciples died a martyr's death, and many of them were crucified. The only one who did not die a martyr's death was John the disciple, and Judas, who killed himself, right? So Andrew, from historical context, and a lot of this, I think kind of Vivian brought this up before, how do we know about the historical context? Some of it's written down, some of it's not. Some of it just gets passed on by generation to generation, right? So Andrew, he pissed off one of the governors of Rome, like many of the disciples did, and so they wanted to crucify him. So they crucified him on an X-shaped cross. So if you ever hear of the cross of St. Andrew, and it's an X shape, that's why, because he was crucified on an X. You'll see this on some flags, actually. So it's actually quite popular. Many of the flags you see with an X shape on them are referring to St. Andrew. And he did not want to die the same way as Christ, so that's why he was crucified on an X-shaped cross. He was lashed and not nailed, so they took his arms and they wrapped rope around them over and over again to the cross. And the reason they did that was they were really mad at him, so they wanted to prolong his death even longer than nailing him to the cross. Yeah, apparently he really made this governor mad. The lore behind this is that either he or his wife led the governor's wife to Christ. Because she now had found Jesus, that really pissed him off. So he decided to crucify Andrew in this way. So, once again, crucifixion, a very painful way to go. When your arms are stretched up like this, you are bringing your diaphragm up, which makes it very hard for you to breathe. So you have to push and pull in order to come up and breathe a little bit and then sink back down. And when you're hanging like that, it's just very, very, very painful. And it's a very brutal way to die. He was lashed, so it's going to take even longer for him to die. But also, the lore behind his crucifixion was that he was on the cross proclaiming Jesus for 2 days, right? So he's up there, he's hanging on the cross, right? And he knows he's going to die. And what does he do before he dies? He tells everybody he can about how great Jesus is hanging on a cross, right? And so when you think about Andrew and you think about him witnessing Jesus's miracles, right? He wants everyone to know that what he's dying for is the way, the truth, and the life. It is Jesus. and he died for Jesus.
All right.